A very good morning to one and all. I welcome you all to the annual endowment lecture on the auspicious event of the Peetharohana Jayanti of Pujyasri Jayendrasaraswati Shankaracharya Mahaswamigal. This endowment has been established by Professor G.J.V. Jagannatha Raju. This annual lecture series is mainly meant for conducting speeches on spiritual and modern related ideas. So let us start this program with the Vedic Mangalalcharanam by the students of Sanskrit department.
Harihi Om Samidhagnindu Sita Grete Bodhayata Tithim Asmin Havya Juhotana Susamidhaya So Chike Gretanti Baran Juhotana Agnaye Jatave Tase Harihi Om.
I now invite the head of Department of Sanskrit to give the welcome address.
Apara Karuna Sindhum Jnanadam Santarupinam Shri Chandrasekhara Gurum Pranamami Mudanmaham Parityajya Maunam Batadha Sthitim Cha Brajan Bharatasya Pradesat Pradesam Madhusyandi Bacha Janan Dharma Marge Nayan Sri Jayendro Gurur Bhati Chitte Namamah Shankaranvakhya Jayendrasaraswati Sri Gurum Sistamarganu Netaram Sanmati Pradam Satyanarayana Kshetrat Satyabratamupagatam Asraye Kamakoti Sam Satyasri Chandrasekharam. Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. With the benign blessings of His Holiness of Kanchi Kamakoti Peetham, the Department of Sanskrit and Indian Culture is organizing today the endowment lecture on the eve of Peetharohana Jayanti of Pujyasri Jayendrasaraswati Swamigal. And it is a regular practice of the department. Every year actually used to have this endowment lecture. And the focus of this endowment lecture is when we are focusing in the department, providing the knowledge of traditional system, traditional knowledge through the different text. Such type of program actually used to have to focus some new area in the field of IKS, knowledge system, and where a new approach, new topic to be explored apart from the Sanskrit department students. And based on this, we have invited today an eminent scholar in field of judiciary system and a great scholar in field of Sanskrit, Shri.Krishnan ji. System, they are actually much more prominent on this particular field. Sir, on this special occasion, first of all, I would like to invite the Vice Chancellor of this university, Professor G. Srinivasu, to present this program. Sir, wholeheartedly I welcome you, sir. And Krishnanji and Mukundanji, it is a prime time for us at least to listen to you today. And it is a great pleasure for the Department of Sanskrit as well as Department of Law. And Professor POP sir, actually Chitur Venkatraman sir is also with us. I wholeheartedly welcoming him. And Commerce ma'am also, ma'am is also there. So with the support of all your department, actually we have been in a position to organize this program wholeheartedly. Faculty members, students, and those who have gathered here for this program, I welcome you all for this gala. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Srinivasu, sir, to give the presidential address.
Jagadguru Charanarvindebhyo Namo Namaha. Respected Krishnan sir and Mukundan sir, Krishna Mukunda, and Venkatesan sir, my colleagues and dear students. Our Pujyasri Jayendrasaraswati Swamiji's Peetharohana Jayanti, that is the annual day of Peetharohanam. Today we are conducting this endowment lecture. Shri G.J.V Jagannatha Raju, Professor Jagannatha Raju was our first chancellor. He was great educationist. He belongs to the Raja Parampara, Jamindar we say, from Vizag, Andhra Pradesh. He was nominated as the Director of Higher Education when the N.T. Ramarao was Chief Minister. He started reforms for higher education. Therefore, he started some separate department to frame the rules and regulations. So, the first Director of Higher Education in Andhra Pradesh is our Jagannatha Raju sir. Very knowledgeable person throughout the world. Always he visits so many countries. Always he stays in Chennai IIT only. From there he used to come over here, and he is very ardent devotee of our Swamijis, particularly Jayendrasaraswati Swamiji. So we are very proud of having him as our ex-chancellor. And he was also the founder member of NAC committee, NAC framework. When it is started, the plan is started. Then the first committee member he was the first committee member, Jagannatha Raju sir. So for so many years he worked as a chancellor, and then of course presently Professor Padma Shri Kutumba Shastri sir is our chancellor. We are very proud of having such great scholars, educationists as our chancellors. When it comes to the today's topic, this is the ancient judiciary system prevailed in India. One thing we have to understand that judiciary is different, dharma is different. Dharma, nyaya. This law, legal aspects, all these are called nyaya. Nyaya means Arthaśāstram nyaya, that is different. That nyaya is different nyaya. This is Nyayasāstram, and Dharmaśāstram. Dharma is different. So, but in India, the Nyayasāstra combined with Dharmaśāstram, with Dharma only. So the Nyayasāstra texts are called Dharmaśāstra Granthas. There is no separate Nyaya-Shastra field, Nyaya-Shastra subject in Sanskritam in ancient India. Only Dharmaśāstram Granthas, smritis, those are also particularly smriti Granthas. They discussed about Nyaya, these laws, punishments, crime, everything. They discussed, particularly Agnivalkya Smriti. Sari is very expert in Agnivalkya Smriti. And Chanakya, of course, Vasishtha, Gautama, so many rishis dealt with that Dharmaśāstra. The present legal system, judiciary system is present what we are following, that is only Nyaya, that is only legal aspects. No Dharma there. Dharma is not at all there, only legal. Crime means crime, for that punishment. But Indian system is crime when it helps the society. Dharma, what is Dharma? Dharma is only simply we can say Dharma is, Vyasa Maharshi says after writing 18 Puranas, he says the final one single sentence, what is Dharma? Paropakaraha punyaya papaya parapedanam. Parapedanam is adharma, paropakara is punya. If we kill one person, if we kill Ravana for the sake of protecting the entire world, that is not crime. But according to present law, that is also crime, for that Rama to be imprisoned, Rama to be hanged. That is present system. But in India, Dharma only main thing. For Dharma, we can do anything to protect people. So, and the difference of procedure, the procedure court, the procedure is here. Now the culprit also can have one advocate to argue for him, to protect from the crime, to protect from the punishment. If any culprit approaches one, advocates one legal expert by giving so many lakhs per day, you don't know, in Supreme Court, the great advocates, they for 1 hour they will claim lakhs of rupees. They argue for the favor of criminals also. That is present system. So, in earlier days, there is no argument for these culprits and everything. The parties, two affected party and the criminal, they both will be presented in court. They themselves will say what they have committed, and then the judges will be there. Naya niti jnas will be there. They will listen that, and they will suggest something to the king to give punishment. According to their advice, king will give punishment. That was the system in earlier days. Now, this is different. The judge, if the judge is single judge, then both advocates are arguing, then he quotes one penal code, something according to this 302, 507, something he will quote, and he will give punishment. In earlier, that was not the system, right? So Kalidasa says, Naya vidbhir naveragni sadasachopadarsitam. Naya vidbhihi. By the scholars, by the experts of Niti, that is Nyaya, those they will present Sat Asat. O king, this is good, this is to be done, this is not to be done. They will present before king, and then king will follow only the Sat, not Asat. Chakshusmattatu shastrena. He sees only through the Shastra view. Whatever Shastra says, he applies that. Raja, he cannot do as he thinks. Freely he cannot do anything. Right? Chakshushmattatu shastrena sukshma karyartha darshina. That Shastram presents even the smallest things, subtle things also. The Shastram will present to the king, and then king only will apply that Shastra rules, not as his own. That was the system in earlier days. Of course, present judiciary system is different. So, Sar is going to talk about the differences between present and old traditional systems of judiciary in India. Remember one thing. Before arrival of English people, maximum 150 years, 200 years. Before arrival of English people, the India, Bharata Desha, lived very richly, very comfortably, very peacefully, very healthily. Our society was very experts, very highly scholars were there. But English people presented that we all are fools. We don't know anything. We don't have the medicine system. Medicines we don't have. We don't know to wear the clothes, even to brush. We don't know. That was the teachings given by the English people. All English convents are teaching the same thing. Those trained with the English thoughts, Macaulay thoughts, those only the teachers. Till today, they are that type of teachers are there. You are future teachers, particularly B.Ed students and Sanskrit students. For these students, only teaching is the profession in future. Of course, become MBA, they also will be teachers. But you remember that the Indian system is greater than any other system. First, we have to respect Indian system, Bharatiya system, and then we have to study. If we don't know, we have to study. We have to listen carefully these the lectures of this. So much research. Sir has made so much research, and we are planning to associate with him further in the connection of law department and MBA department. We have to utilize his expertise for our knowledge sake. So I invite sir, and there are so many differences. Of course, punishment and prayashchittam also there. That is different thing. I don't want to talk on that prayashchitta subject now. So I invite Krishnan sir and Mukundan sir to make you to love the traditional judiciary system of great India. Right? Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for explaining and sharing your insights on how Dharma was different from Nyaya, and how the Britishers tried to destroy our Bharat's rich heritage. Thank you for your insights, sir. I now request our Honorable Vice Chancellor to honor our chief guest.
Man
Now, before going into the talk, it is important that we actually know at least a little bit about how modern law started. So, actually speaking, first the first civil law book was named as Hindu law, which was done by a person called Coolbrook, which was actually a translated version of a text called Vivada Bhangarnava by an author named Jagannatha Tarka Panchanana, who was a logician and a Nyaya philosopher in India. So the Englishmen wanted to establish their civil and criminal courts in India using Indian Shastric law, so that and for that they got their input from many pundits across India. And after getting their inputs, they appointed pundits as Sardas in Amin courts and Sardas in Adalat courts. So the IPC, which is modernized into BNS 2023, is not at all a modernization, but basically it is just a bridge between the new and ancient laws. So to get this knowledge, it is crucial that we learn and study Dharmaśāstras also. And now going into the talk, let me introduce our chief guest for today's talk, Mr. Krishnan Venkatraman. Mr. Krishnan Venkatraman is an advocate and researcher in Dharmaśāstram and has keen interest in Sanskrit literature. He is also a trustee member of Sadvidya Paripalana Trust. It is a trust which is established to protect our ancient knowledge from Vedas and Shastras. And in that trust, they are conducting symposium for young Shastra students and also many workshops they are doing related to Yajnavalkya Smriti and its commentary Mitakshara, which was a well-known law book in ancient India. He also established the Mitakshara study group, where eminent lawyers like Dr. Mukundan sir and even Sanskrit scholars like our own Dr. Naveen sir, they're all part of this Mitakshara study group, where they compare ancient and modern law texts and prepare a syllabus for a textbook on this. And I request all the students to listen carefully when we're going to the talk, and we'll be having a question answer session after the talk. And over to you, sir.
विद्या संध्योदयोद्रेकाद् अविद्या रजनीक्षये यदुदेति नमस्तस्मै कस्मैचित् विश्वतस्त्विषे. Namaskaram to all. I just wanted to check around a year or so ago, I had the good opportunity to discuss some of these topics with some of your colleagues. How many of you were there in the previous session? Can you sort of indicate? A few of you? Okay, good. ते अवगच्छन्ति वा? एवम् एवं यतोहि गत अवसरे काश्चित् कन्याः केचित् बालाः च आसन् गत अवसरे तो भवत्या तत्र दृष्टं न वा गत अवसरे यत् जातं. So there might be a little bit of an overlap, but I think a majority of the students have not had the opportunity to go through the subject matter. So I'll Look forward to sharing. And kindly note, I believe this is a sort of an informal. So I would like to have feedback from you whenever you want to, either during the discussion or even later. So I look forward to having some kind of an interaction also with all of you, because here we are all just equals. I'm trying to share my experiences with you. As indicated by Santosh ji, I am a practicing advocate. So therefore, I have some knowledge of the nature of the practice of law. But apart from that, I also had the good fortune of having studied the Shastram in the original, and to a certain extent having to understand what the intent of the Shastram could be with regard to applicability to current situations. So that is the kind of understanding that I'm going to try to share with all of you. And I look forward for all of yours feedback on some of these topics that I'll be sharing with you. So our Mitakshara study group primarily looks at the Dharmaśāstram and the Arthaśāstram. So these are the two texts. As the Honorable Vice Chancellor mentioned, Dharmaśāstram, especially with regard to the applicability of law, we are looking at the Yajnavalkya Smriti primarily, the Mitakshara commentary of the Yajnavalkya Smriti. Arthaśāstram, all of you will be aware of the Chanakya, Kautilya Arthaśāstram. So that's the sort of popular, at least most of you must have heard of it, and we'll try to introduce some of the subject matters in the topics as well. So one of the aspects, because when we understand Shastram, it's especially Dharmaśāstram or Arthaśāstram, we have to be aware that we are not going to be looking at the outcomes of social system. So today we are having a social system. We follow the constitution. We have an economy that's actively managed by the government, etc. What do you think is one of the primary outcomes by which we are measuring society? Can any of you sort of think, how do you think we are measuring the outcomes of society? If you are a successful society, what would you say is the measure? Does anybody want to hazard a guess about it? Do you think I'll be right in saying if you have an economic success, that we are a successful society? That's a sufficient metric to measure the success of a society. So that you have one of those metrics here, that is Artha. Whereas our culture also recognizes three other important metrics. So it's not only Artha, but there is also Dharma. Artha is there, Kama, and also to a certain extent Moksha. So, but the first three, the Trivarga, which will be Dharma, Artha, Kama, and the general understanding that I have from going through the various Shastric texts is that each individual, each of you and all of us, and each individual in our country has a unique temperament. Each one has a unique temperament, a unique desire to achieve certain aspects of Dharma, Artha, and Kama. So some people will have more interest in achieving Artha. Some will have a greater interest in achieving Dharma, some in Kama. So therefore people choose varying lifestyles. Various goals will lead to various lifestyles. And as we progress from young students to college students to whichever profession you engage in, and by the time you get on to a certain stage of your life, you will be able to judge yourself. What is it that drives you? This might not be, this is the time when you're trying to learn, understand yourself. As time progresses, you will reach a situation where you realize this is what drives me. That therefore, Artha, Kama, Dharma, which balance of those three Trivarga elements is defining you the most. So each person will have a unique combination of these three. And the idea is the social contract that, as the Honorable Vice Chancellor mentioned, the social contract that is provided for by Dharmaśāstram or by Arthaśāstram, both I will deal with them as sister subjects, because when we read Dharmaśāstram and Arthaśāstram in their original text, we find that there is a great deal of overlap, especially in sense of the practical elements of judicial and social administration. There is a great deal of overlap between Dharmaśāstram and Arthaśāstram, with the difference being that in Dharmaśāstram the focus is on attaining ethical correctness, ethical validity with regard to the methods employed. Artha looks at the practical elements of ensuring that there is a greater value to the members of society. So therefore Dharma and Artha look at the same problems through different lenses, and so therefore it makes sense for us to look at these aspects with regard to understanding what kind of a social contract we should try to achieve in our country. So therefore the idea of exposing all of you students of business, especially students of law here, if some of you are here, and students of literature and Sanskrit, is to give you a sense of what are these kind of thoughts that are prevailed. And these thoughts have prevailed not for a century, or they are not some pictures of the long gone past, but they have survived over thousands of years. So if these ideas have survived over thousands of years, obviously they had a value. People had a sense of wanting to keep those thoughts alive. And so therefore it makes sense for us to see how these elements of dharma, artha and kama, the individual desire to achieve dharma, artha and kama, had been facilitated by these structures that are provided for in the Dharmaśāstram and Arthaśāstram. So, I mean, just to give you an overview, the Shruti texts, which are the oldest recorded literature that we have, they have a great deal of inspiration. So therefore, when we talk about the Shruti texts, they are primarily looked upon as what inspires the other thinkers, the Smriti thinkers or the Shastric thinkers, to look at what could be the ideal state of how a human society should aspire towards, or a human state should aspire towards. The Shruti texts are the source of inspiration. They are not usually directly quoted. So you will not find in the Smriti texts or in the other discussions, you will not have direct quotations from Shruti texts, because they are a general collection of inspirational literature. The more, I will say, the structured expression of what social organization should be like is in the later texts, the Smriti texts and the Shastram and Dharmaśāstram, Arthaśāstram, Dharmasutrams, etc. They became more focused on trying to deliver these same thoughts in a more structured manner. So that's, you can go to the next. So initially, let's look at Dharma and Dharmaśāstram. So Honorable Vice Chancellor also mentioned that yat punyam paropakaraya, paropakaram punyaya parapidanam, papaya parapidanam. So in fact, a similar thought has come out in the Mahabharatam in the Shanti Parva, because the discussions on dharma and artha, what is right and wrong, what is beneficial or not in terms of value addition to society, is not limited only to the Dharmaśāstram texts. The Pauranic texts, the Itihasas, etc. also have detailed discussion. And this is a sort of a concentrated understanding that comes out in the Shanti Parva, where Bhishma and Yudhishthira have detailed discussions on the nature of dharma, where we see this shloka, Yadanyair vihitam neched atmanah karma purushaha natat pareshu kurvita janan apriyam atmanah. So therefore, do not do to others what you know will be unpleasant if done unto you. So that becomes a simple way to test at the individual level, at the social level, even at the international level, whether something is dharmic, whether it is dharma or adharma. This is a simple test to assess whether a particular action, whether a particular course of action is in accordance with dharma or not. And believe it or not, when you go through the Dharmaśāstram texts, more often than not, you find that this principle is reflected in the discussions, in the writings, in the shlokas, etc. So this becomes an embedded principle of what can be understood to be dharma in a simple sense. Of course, another definition of dharma in the Yajnavalkya Smriti is Ijyachara Dama Himsa Dana Swadhyaya Karmanam Ayam to Paramo Dharmo Yad Yoge and Atma Darshanam. Because since we'll be focusing on the Yajnavalkya Smriti, Yajnavalkya himself has been referred to multiply as Yogishwara. So he is a Yogishwara Yajnavalkya. Like some great individuals are referred to as Rishis, Maharishis, Brahma Rishis, Deva Rishis. Yajnavalkya is typically referred to as Yogishwara because he has a sort of a nuanced understanding of the yoga, and the vision of yoga as applied to social understanding is what he's credited with in many ways. So that Yad Yogen Atma Darshanam, so amongst all these various actions, Ijya, this is Yagam or Achara, Dhamma, Ahimsa, Dana, Swadhyaya, amongst all these actions, the final and most superior dharma is the Atma Darshanam, being able to understand what you are. That course of action, that way of life, that allows you to understand what you are and be in a sense of comfort with what you are. That is dharma. That is another way to look at dharma. So as mentioned, And we have in the recent past, we have gone through multiple stages of colonialism. So we know that around 75 years odd years ago, we had European colonized. We were colonized for around 150 years by the Europeans. Prior to that, we had Central Asian colonies. So when you talk about Mughals, primarily they came from Uzbekistan, that is Central Asian colonization. They brought with them their ideas about how social structures should be maintained, etc. Interesting thing is that despite all these multiple stages of colonialism, and this is not the first time this land of Bharat has gone through colonization, even in the past, because we follow the Shaka Samvat, we follow the Shaka calendar or Vikram Samvat, even today. And the Shaka Samvat itself is an event of great freedom because the Shakas had dominated us for a great period of time. Shakas had also come from Central Asia, just like the Mughals had come from Uzbekistan. Shakas had come from roughly around Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan. So they had also controlled beyond Ujjain, they had controlled most of our country for hundreds of years, and that dominated a lot of the social, political, and other structures, economic structures. And with Vikramaditya, he sort of had this great alliance of rulers from the rest of India, and he pushed them out. So that becomes a great event of, just as we celebrate our Independence Day today, the Shaka Samvat itself is a commemoration of our independence from a colonial yoke that was upon us. So therefore, we have gone through multiple stages of colonialism, freedom, etc. And these traditions have survived through all of these phases. So not just the immediate phase of two multiple colonialisms that we have faced now. Even in the past, we have had multiple periods of colonialism, and all of these Dharmaśāstram traditions have survived that. So these living traditions of the Dharmaśāstram, even up to the time of the British, when they came in the 18th century, around 1850s or so, in villages, in cities, I mean, you have some law professors here, right? So today, for example, if we look at our pendency in courts, primarily where do the problems in the courts come from? If you look at 70-75% of the pendency in courts is on account of family disputes, primarily land disputes, family disputes, and even a number of the criminal aspects can be traced back to some kind of a family dispute over property, etc. So around 70-75% of the pendency in courts is due to family property issues. And those had to be dealt with in a generation, because every time you have a generation passing to the next generation, there is bound to be some kind of a dispute where you'll have the same land has to be divided or otherwise settled between family members. And those settlements, those decisions with regard to the clearing of the disputes had been going on through process of local arbitrations, which relied upon the Dharmaśāstram. So till we had the Hindu Succession Act, 1955, prior to that, even during the British period, as mentioned, we had the scholars in the various courts who used to assist the judges, etc., because they had to apply the Dharmaśāstram principles for understanding how in a particular dispute, it could be a zamindar, it could be a normal farmer, it could be a temple, Pandit. So Pandits were required to help understand how the Dharmaśāstram principles had to be applied to the individual facts of a case. So therefore, we had the Dharmaśāstram traditions having definitely continued during the colonial period into the post-independence period. So that had been, these are recorded. So we have records of the Pandits, etc., being there in court. So therefore, the Shastram was a living, it was not merely something that was studied in as a picture of the past. It was a living tradition. And the reason why it is a living tradition, and we are all expressions of our forefathers today. And the fact is, every organism survives only if it adapts. There has to be an adaptation to different conditions. So if our temperature in the world is rising today, for example, we have to adapt to it. And so we'll pass on those lessons of adaptation to our forerunners, etc. So all of these traditions have also adapted. So without adaptation, they could not have survived because they have to go through various phases. The economic pressures, the international pressures, all of them would have come and gone over millennia. And it is that adaptation principle that is again captured in the shloka. This is again in the Mahabharatam from the Shanti Parva. It is Ardhanashe samutpanne hyardham tyajati panditaha. Ardhanashe samutpanne sarvam tyajati durmatihi. So because these learnings in the Dharmaśāstram traditions have come over centuries. People have learned if there is a particular problem, because we have problems in our society even now. Nobody can say that either our economic, judicial or administrative structures are perfect. No country can say that. We have to learn, we have to keep understanding how to adapt and make it better. For example, judicial pendency. There is, for example, a vexing problem of perjury. Perjury is people who don't make false statements, and false statements leads to unnecessary delay in the judicial processes. Similarly, you have problem with regard to delay in processes or the presence of advocates, etc., that to a certain extent representation, professional pleaders. So all of those problems had been recognized from time to time. Solutions had been found with regard to what is specific to the people of this land, because we have our own unique problems. We have a land which is extremely suitable for human population. It is not by accident that we have the maximum population in the world. We are the most populated country in the world because this land is fit for population. It is good. The elements are good. We have food production. We have environmentally, it is conducive for humans to say, which is why we have humans in such large, dense numbers in our country. And that comes with unique problems. People have their own traditions, their own sense of community allegiance, identities, etc. And in these conditions, what is the best solution that can be provided by a system so that those four vargas, at least the three varga of dharma, artha and kama, can be maximally given to each individual. So we have limited resources, more population, and we have to provide for the maximum benefit of the maximum people. And so those solutions have come from time to time, learned over centuries. And so therefore those solutions, why? So the question is, why should we think of keeping our Dharmaśāstram traditions alive? Why not reinvent, start afresh, if that question comes? That question is answered by this shloka, which says that when you have half, if you have a system with 100 rules, and you find today that 50 of those rules are no longer topical, that is, they are no longer current, they are no longer applicable in the current system. So what will a Pandit do? What will an intelligent person do? Look at what are still applicable. Look at the 50 rules which are still applicable. Leave out the 50 which are not applicable. And so sort of you learn from the past and you learn for the future, or you apply for the future. So you have ardham, only half is left, half is still maintained. Whereas the durmatihi is the prejudiced mind will throw the baby out with the bathwater. So you know the term throwing the baby out with the bathwater is, you not only you lose what you have learned, so you're losing the learnings of hundreds of generations that have come on to us through the Dharmaśāstram. That is definitely the prejudiced mind, the durmati. So we should try to aspire to become panditas and not durmatis. So coming now to the textual sources of Dharmaśāstram. So if you look at the Yajnavalkya Smriti, the third shloka says that Purana Nyaya Mimamsa Dharmaśāstranga Mishritaha Vedasthanani Vidyanam Dharmasya Cha Chaturdasha. So 14 sources of Dharmaśāstram are the Puranas, Nyaya, Mimamsa, Dharmaśāstram. Dharmaśāstram, Manu, it is mentioned as Shrutistu Vedo Vigneyo Dharmaśāstram Tavai Smriti. The Smriti texts are the Dharmaśāstram primarily, and the 4 Angas and the Vedas, the 4 Vedas, it's 6 Angas and the 4 Vedas. So you have 14 sources of Dharma. That is, these are the accepted sources, but those are liable to be understood as per the generation that is reading it. So we have Yajnavalkya Smriti. These are the various, for all of those who are interested to learn more, we have a very good book by Justice Rama Joyce, Legal and Constitutional History of India, where he has tried for the last 50 years ago. He has come out with a simple understanding of the Dharmaśāstram traditions. And of course, for those with greater interest, we have Bharat Ratna, Dr. P.V. Kane. He has been awarded the Bharat Ratna for his activity of collecting and collating and giving a perspective to the history of Dharmaśāstram. So these are all great works which are available now. I'm sure it's available in your library also. These are those who have interest can go through these other texts as well. See that some of the sources. So initially the Vedic period was followed by the Sutra period, where there was still a direct link to the Vedic traditions and the ritualistic traditions, etc. Keeping in mind that these were again 3,000 years ago. So this is the past. We just to understand how these traditions evolved into what we are able to see today as the Dharmaśāstram traditions. Even by the time of Yajnavalkya, the Sutra traditions had come out from the forefront, and the Shastrik, the Dharmaśāstrik or the Smriti traditions had come out in the forefront. This is already 2,500 years ago by the time of the Mahabharatam. by the time of Chandragupta Maurya, Chanakya, etc., these traditions had started changing. So you're looking at what was before that. You can go to the next. And the smritis. So when you look at the smritis, they don't quote or they don't directly base their understanding on the Vedic Vidhi, but they present it as something that people who were searching out for. So another interesting aspect of the smriti that we have seen, as I told you, this is not our first awakening from a long colonial slumber. This is not the first awakening. It has happened in the past. And when you look at, for example, the previous rejuvenation of the smriti traditions, for example, when Shivaji wanted Swarajya, when he had made his declaration for Swarajya, he had to think of a new system that was going to be applicable. Shivaji, of course, for his administrative rules, he primarily relied upon the Shukraniti. That was his primary place of application. But he was also had to go back to the Smritis. So he needed, at time to time, the point that I'm making is at time to time, as a society, we try to reimagine our identity. Who we are, what does it mean to be a Bharatiya, what does it mean to be an Indian? And very often it is not the first time that we had to deal with a situation where we had to take out the colonial yoke. So today also, if you look at the central government, time and again it talks about decolonialization. It talks about decolonialization of the education system, of the legal system, of various other administrative systems. So when we talk about decolonialization, we need to have an alternative. And we need to try to remember who we are. So that is the smaranam. We try to recollect who we are as a people. And what is the best way to describe our society so that we come out with a solution that is better and more suitable to our requirements. And so this is one basis of understanding what is a smriti. For example, when Mitaksharakara, Vijnaneshwara, he was around 900 years ago, or he had come out of a period of colonial yoke, as I mentioned, the Shaka period, etc. He had to reinvent society for the rulers who had sort of engaged him. He had been given a task of writing something that we would think of as a constitution. So when our constitution assembly members sat down in the late 1940s, they had to rediscover what it means to be an Indian. And so they had to give our own constitution. But of course, at the end, we look at our constitution, we find that it has a lot of inputs from Western inspiration, not necessarily from the Smriti inspiration. But at the same time, if you look at Vijnaneshwara, he was the one of the Pandits in the Chalukya Empire around 900 years ago. He was given a task because Chalukya Empire by that time had stretched out beyond just Karnataka. It had influence all across the Indian subcontinent. And they wanted to look at what could be a meaningful system for the administration of law in that particular area. And so he came out with the Smriti traditions as the basis. So what I'm trying to mention here is that the Smriti traditions have been relied upon time and again over our history as a basis for trying to establish a system of governance, both legal as well as administrative. And that tradition is something that we can look to even in the present. So therefore, it makes sense to look at the Dharmaśāstram traditions to remind ourselves of who we are. And it changes, as I mentioned here, it changes from time to time. Different thinkers, different locations, different places had different sensibilities about what it means to be, what is Dharma for that particular place. So therefore, it has been prone to reinvention. And the Smriti tradition is something that we can definitely lean upon today for understanding who we are even today. Next. So Manu, the older Smriti, of course, is Manu Smriti. Well, I just jump here just to point out that it was more poetic. Manu was, being the older Smriti, it was transitioning from the poetic Vedic perspective to the more bureaucratic, norm-based governance traditions that we have today. So if you look at Manu, most of the Manu texts will be it has a poetic purport, which we don't find today in the later Smritis. So it had 12 chapters and 2,694 verses, etc. Just to give you some sense of what the Manusmriti had. For example, these kind of discussions in the Manusmriti, which you can see on the screen today, you will not find in the later Smritis, which are more, which more look like a legal code today. For example, the first shloka is Yam Mata Pitarau Klesham Sahete Sambhave Nranam Natasya Nishkriti Shakya Kartum Varsha Shatairapi. So in simple ways is, when there is a discussion on how we have to respect our parents. So the effort that the parents have taken to raise a child, Mata Pitaro Klesham Sahete Sambhave Nranam, for raising up a generation, that cannot be paid back even in 100 years. So that is a simple thing. So this sort of gives you a different perspective, a poetic kind of a perspective, to try to relate to law itself. The other shloka is Yatha Khanan Khanitrena Naro Var Yadhigachati Tatha Gurugatam Vidyam Shushrushur Adhigachati. So how to get, you're all in a knowledge center here, you're in a university, how to get knowledge from a guru is described. The similarity is sort of charted out between Khanitra, that is when you want to get water from underground, you have to dig deep into water, into the ground to get the water. You have to access, you have to take the effort. So the student cannot just be passive. The student has to be an active participant in the process of transmission of knowledge from the guru to the shishya. So that the student also has to dig deep into the process of learning. So that how Tatha Gurugatam Vidyam Shushrushuhu Adhigachati. The student also has to take the effort to get the vidya from the guru. Similarly, in the case of women, Pitrubhir Bhratrubhish Chaitaha Patibhir Devarais Tatha Pujya Bhushayitavyascha Bahu Kalyanam Ipsubhi. The families that want to do well in life, Kalyanam, those who want Kalyanam, they have to ensure that the women in the family have to be taken care of, Bhushayitavya, they have to be given whatever requirements, alankaras, etc., by the fathers, by the brothers, by the husband's brothers. The extended family has to take a special effort to ensure that the women are taken care of. As long as the women are taken care of, the family does well. Kalyanam Ipsubhi. Tasmad etas sada pujya bhushanachhadanashanaihi bhutikamair narair nityam satkareshu utsaveshu cha. So in all events, women have to be specially taken care of by people who desire to succeed in life. And that is something that we see even today. Successful families have their women taken care of well. The point here is Manusmriti has these poetic descriptions of how we have to go around with leading life. So therefore that sets it apart from the other. It's again an inspiring smriti for the later smritis. Whereas Yajnavalkya smriti, although the rishi who was attributed with Yajnavalkya, he is much older. This present composition that we have in the Yajnavalkya smriti is attributed to around 2100 years ago. So it's a much later development after the Manusmriti. It has become more detailed, structured. It is no longer as poetic as the Manusmriti was, or definitely not like the Vedas that inspired even the Manusmriti. It has a constitution-like structure. So we have to keep in mind that around from 2100 years ago, it has formed across the country in different jurisdictions something that is akin to a constitution today. So that people would look upon today in our constitution, if you have fundamental rights, actionable fundamental rights. So you have multiple rights mentioned in the Yajnavalkya Smriti, which are actionable by different people in different relationships. It could be in a marriage, it could be in a debtor-creditor relationship, it could be in a criminal event when it occurs. So who has the right to take action against the other person in terms of the Smriti? The Smriti becomes an actionable entity. And people were, so we have history of today as we have court judgments. We had something called Jayapatrams. So in different commercial relationships, family relationships, property relationships, in various type of relationships, actionable events when they occur, they are taken to a court of law, in this case of Vyavahara Sabha. And today you are aware of the word Sabhyata. So when you say Sabhyata, what do you understand? Civilization, Bharatiya Sabhyata, etc. So if you look at the basis of the word Sabhyata, Sabhyata comes from the Sabhyas. Sabhyas were the people in the Sabhas. They were the elements of the constituents of the Sabhas. Sabhas had the Niyukta Sabhyas. Judges, like judges or judicial thinkers in a way. And those Sabhas were driving the fabric of society. So every decision in a Sabha will let the other people know that this is right, this is not right. This is right, this is not right. So people start adjusting their lifestyle according to the Sabhas or the Sabhyas. And the Sabhyas were driving the Sabhyata. So even today, law drives the fabric of society. So therefore, when we talk about Sabhyata, it comes from the Sabhas and the various decisions over hundreds of generations, which is what we now see as something akin to a common culture across the land, which had this common inspiration. And the fact is that are you all aware of this thing called the Matsya Nyaya or You're aware of Matsya Nyaya? So what would you say? What is Matsya Nyaya? Okay, the big fish eats the small fish. You're aware of Matsya Nyaya. The big fish eats us, so it means might is right. So might is right will not lead to a settled, successful society, because the people who are not having the power, they will never have the inspiration or the incentive to work hard and to create. And so therefore, eventually it will lead to degradation of society. Society will not be productive. It will not be productive in terms of wealth. It will not be productive in terms of dharma. It will not be productive in terms of karma. It will be a sort of a bad, ineffective, dysfunctional society. So when the rishi has to look at avoiding Matsya Nyaya, so the drishti, the vision of the rishi who has to work out a system for social justice has to be on the smaller fish, protecting the smaller fish, the weaker members of the society, people who otherwise cannot stand up to the power of the might. So those are the people that the rishis had to look at. And when Yajnavalkya had to start out his Yajnavalkya Smriti, and when he was asked what is dharma, he said, Mithilasthasya yogindraha kshanam dhyatva bravin munin yasmin deshe mrugah krishnaha tasmin dharman nibodhata. So there are 2-3 interesting aspects that come out of this description of Dharmaśāstram. One, we know that Mithilasthasya yogindraha. So Yajnavalkya was in a place, is Mithila. The Mithila we know is somewhere in the Nepal-Bihar border, towards the northern part of India. Sitting there, he could have a sense of where this dharma is applicable. The dharma that is discussed here is not for every part. There is this part of the world which has some unique parameters because of the weather, because of the people, because of the culture, etc. These unique parameters are here, and these parameters are defined by the presence of this particular animal, Mrugah Krishna, black buck. And this black buck is an extremely sensitive animal. It is vulnerable. It is one of the weakest sort of species. It is always preyed upon. And he says, when this Mrugah Krishna is successfully proliferating, where this Mrugah Krishna has a successful range, you know that the dharma is applicable. You know the dharma is applicable in that place. So the interesting point is that the rishis did not just limit their vision to human beings, human society, weaker members of society, but also animals like the Mrugah Krishna who could not speak. Interestingly, if you are, from the last discussion also we had pointed out that this Krishna Mruga is endemic to the Indian subcontinent. You won't find this animal anywhere else in the world. It is endemic to the Indian subcontinent. So he was able to link the presence of this dharma with the presence of this creature. Interestingly, at the time of independence, around 1947, we had large herds of this animal present across the country. Across the subcontinent, this animal was present. That is, the people's lifestyle was not only facilitating quality of life for human beings, but also quality of life for such creatures. They need grazing land, they need protection to a certain extent. People have to have a sense of care and a sense of daya, krupa towards the existence of these creatures also. They were protected by the populations around them. And at the time of independence, these animals were definitely prevalent across the country. Today, if you look at the quality of dharma, because one of the talk that was the Honorable Vice Chancellor had brought out, there is a difference between dharma and nyaya. So although we have application of nyaya today, or the rule of law, with the reduction of the quality of dharma in the country, which is also sort of seen, this animal has now become fairly endangered. It is endangered across the country. Only small herds remain. Earlier, there were herds of more than 500 such animals moving around. Today, they have become endangered. Interestingly, in Pakistan and Bangladesh, this animal has become extinct today. It was not extinct at the time of independence. So therefore, there is a direct correlation between the application of a particular type of lifestyle amongst the people and the quality of life, not only for animals, but also for such endangered and vulnerable species. So Yajnavalkya Smriti has got more structure. So today, any student of law, when you read Yajnavalkya Smriti, especially the Vyavahara Adhyaya, it will be more akin to what we see in statutes today, both criminal, procedural, or civil statutes. You have the statute-like structure there in the Yajnavalkya Smriti, something that a student of law will be able to appreciate. From the next. And the view of the Yajnavalkya Smriti that we are more familiar with today is the Vijnaneshwara view, the Mitakshara view, which was developed around 900 years ago. 900 years ago, you had Vijnaneshwara, who was there in somewhere northern Karnataka today, and he had brought out a particular vision, which today you will associate with being liberal. So when you say a liberal vision where there is more quality of life given to the individual and sort of freedoms to various sections of society, he championed that particular viewpoint. Yajnavalkya Smriti had a certain textual interpretation which had become more conservative over time. A lot of conservative interpretations had come into play. And Vijnaneshwara was credited with giving it a more liberal interpretation. So for example, you can read the same text in Yajnavalkya Smriti, which will try to suggest that now, for example, when we look at people who are to be empowered, the weaker members of society, a child in a family, will it get right to family property or not? Because the elders in the family having passed away due to a certain event, it is being redistributed. Will a child get right to property or not? It becomes a question. The child is weaker. It cannot stand up for its rights. Similarly, women in the family, do they have right to property, separate property, etc.? Over time, certain interpretations had crept into the social structure, which were becoming more and more conservative, which were trying to edge out those who were slightly weaker. And that had led to problems in society. So we didn't get colonized because of only external aggression. We were also, the quality of our own administration had deteriorated. We have to also look for faults within ourselves. If we had become subject to colonialization, obviously we were also suffering from some certain weaknesses. So at the time of Vijnaneshwara, he had definitely pushed back against those conservative interpretations, definitely given more power to children in family matters, rights in family matters, given much more rights to women in terms of family inheritance of family property, because one section of society had started to say women probably don't deserve a share in the family property when it comes to inheritance, etc. Whereas Vijnaneshwara pushed back against it and ensured that the women got equal share in family property in various kinds of family distribution. So therefore, his interpretation probably, I can only think of it as having improved the quality of life in those jurisdictions where this particular interpretation was applied, the Chalukyas, etc. And that's caught on like wildfire. So this was 900 years ago. Within 200-300 years ago, across the country, the Mitakshara interpretation became the preferred interpretation. Because those societies which were following the Mitakshara provisions had definitely started becoming more successful, more productive, more well-to-do, more economically also more as a growth engine, so to say. And so therefore, by the time the British came, more or less across the country, the Mitakshara viewpoint, except for certain parts of Bengal, where an even more liberal viewpoint of the Jimuta Vahana was applied. So therefore, that became that becomes the bedrock of our present understanding of how to take the Dharmaśāstram traditions forward. So Yajnavalkya Smriti itself is split into three portions. The Acharadhyaya, which talks about how individuals have to look at their, these are the private lives, so to say. When we say religion is a private matter, those are primarily dealt with in Acharadhyaya. Vyavaharadhyaya is public. It is no longer private, because you are interacting, you are lending money to across the society, you are buying, selling, you are creating, you are having wealth that is passing from generation to generation. So Vyavaharadhyaya are those aspects of public life which need to be looked at with regard to administration of law. So those are covered in Vyavaharadhyaya. And Prayashchittadhyaya is again sort of a private matter. So we are focusing primarily on the Vyavaharadhyaya, which is similar to judicial administration as we see today. And some of the topics, because there are a number of prakaranas in the Vyavaharadhyaya, some of the prakaranas, there are 28 of them. And out of them, some of them I've mentioned here, Sadharana Vyavahara Matrika, which gives you a template for judicial administration. You have Runadana, which talks about debts and commercial transactions in very great detail. So today when we talk about leverage debt, or whether a debt is payable with securitized debt, etc., all those aspects were there. People were having healthy commercial transactions across the country. So we have details of how debt transactions have to be dealt with. Daya Vibhaga, which we discussed, 75% of the dispute resolution events that occur across the country, not today, even Mahabharatam time, it is a family dispute. At the end of the day, Mahabharatam is a family dispute of dividing family property, intergenerational transmission of family wealth. So Daya Vibhaga is a sort of a detailed discussion on that is there. You have Vetana Dana. The Vetana Dana is people who are engaged in for salaried members. So whether if salary is paid or not, and how in what measure it has to be paid, not paid, etc. Disputes arising out of service issues. Vetana Dana. Sahasa, which are violent criminal issues. Steya, theft. Stri Sangrahana, that is there is a special chapter for crimes against women. And Krita Anushaya, customer dissatisfaction. Today, when we talk about when you buy something, you're not happy with the quality of either services or products. So all of them are discussed in these various representative prakaranams. So the first prakaranam is how procedurally any dispute has to be dealt with. And the first 8 verses of the Yajnavalkya Smriti talk about setting up this sabha, this Vyavahara Sabha, how a sabha has to be created. What are the qualifications? The first, it starts out with the qualifications of the judges itself, whether the judges have to have a certain amount of absence of kama, krodha, lobha. So without kama, krodha, lobha, they should be looking at issues dispassionately. And it starts out with an understanding that if the judge itself is corrupt, he is subject to a penalty of twice the decision that he has taken. So for example, if a judge has wrongly given out of kama, krodha, bhaya, if he has made 100 rupee or some valuation he has given in favor of one party, and if it is found later that he has willfully acted in a corrupt manner, he is to be punished, penalized with 200 rupees. So that becomes the. So it starts out and today we are talking about whether we had a golden period of civilization and we had a successful. This success, golden period success, etc., did not come by accident. It was people who were there 200 years ago, 500 years ago, were people like us who had the same issues with regard to the Arishadvarga, Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Mada, Mana, Harsha. Just as they affect us and they make us act in deviant manners, our forefathers were also subject to the same infirmities. And those had to be recognized, accepted, and systems had to be created which will reduce the impact of such outcomes, that is corrupt outcomes or otherwise insufficient outcomes. So that way, the systems were not assuming human beings to be ideal. It assumed human beings to be faulty, and the systems had to be created to ensure that the outcomes would cater to these various faults, etc. So therefore, judicial counsel, punishment for judicial deviant administration of justice. There is a detailed provision for how to file a complaint. It is all written. Imagine today we are not able to imagine that 2,200 years ago, all these procedures were detailed, written in a writing manner. So everything was recorded. So land records were there. There were judicial records which could be referred to later. We had concepts like res sub judigata. So res sub judice or res sub judigata, that is a previous decision could be reopened, checked, verified. If it dealt with the same subject matter of list that is presently being dealt with, it can be cited to obviate the present process, etc. So therefore, all these written detailed procedures with a detailed amount of formality was there. So it is not that they were sort of just beating around in the wild. There was a detailed formal process there for judicial administration, evidence, etc. can go. So the 4-step process, these are the 4 steps of Vyavahara which have been detailed in the Yajnavalkya Smriti. One is Bhasha, which is the plaint, which has to be brought out before the Sabha. Uttaram, which is the reply. And all these Bhasha and Uttaram are directly made. So today there was talk about a number of advocates, etc., leading to the process becoming sometimes delayed. We should be aware that even in the British common law, 150 years ago, we did not have advocates in courts. Even if you went to London, say 150 years ago, most civil matters were directly dealt with between the plaintiff and the defendant before the court. And judgments used to be given in 15 to 20 minutes. Today we are talking about 15 to 20 years. So it used to be a fairly direct transactional process. You hear the party, hear the other party. So even in the British courts, it used to be without advocates up to 150 years ago. They had to change their procedures, and we have inherited those change procedures today. Whereas at the local level, especially when you look at the Vyavahara Sabha used to deal with the local population for a Janapada. And a Janapada typically used to be around what our district is like today. At a district level, we have around 30-40 lakhs population, maybe up to 1 crore of population. That was the kind of jurisdiction that these Sabhas had. And at that level, most of these processes used to be on a direct basis. That is, the plaint is made directly to the Sabha. Uttaram is made to the Sabha in the presence of the complainant. And then there is Kriya, there is leading evidence. There is a discussion about who will have the burden of proof. So today when we go to judicial processes, we have the question of who has burden of proof. All those are detailed. There is a process of asedha or injunction. So today we talk about injunctions, temporary injunction. If you have a matter, till the matter is heard, how will the matter of list, how will the subject matter of list be dealt with? We have asedha. Those kind of aspects are there, summoning of the parties to the court, etc. So that bhasha, uttaram, kriya. And interestingly, the fourth, the outcome is called sadhya siddhi. It is not decision. It is not a decision of a court, but it is how the court or the sabha discovers what is truth. So that process of discovery, that's an interesting way to look at how justice is sort of, the process is such that it uncovers what is right and wrong. That is the manner of the judicial process in the Vyavahara. We also had the discussion of hierarchy of courts. Today, just as you have the president who has the final pardoning power, etc. for criminal matters, you have the Supreme Court, the high courts, and the lower courts. Similarly, you have the hierarchy even in the Vyavahara Sabha or in the Yajnavalkya Smriti, which is the ruler or the Raja, who Nripa. The Nripa is a person who is in charge of administrating a particular area. The Nripa followed by the Vyavahara Sabha, followed by the Pugas, which are large social congregations like villages, cities, etc. Shrenis, which are guilds, specialized guilds, and Kulas. So many disputes have to be taken care of within the family. So those are all. We had a hierarchy which each level of dispute resolution can be cited in the next level. So there is a certain amount of formalization. And from what we could understand, Puga, Shreni, Kulas are similar to arbitration today. They are not as formal as you will have a Vyavahara Sabha. Vyavahara Sabha is more like a court process with specific standards of evidence, etc. So we have various levels of hierarchy of judicial processes, just as we have today. So we are able to look at various aspects of the Dharmaśāstram text, if you look at it, the shlokas, and how they can be mapped onto certain aspects of our modern law. So we have, and if you look at it, eventually when human beings interact, when you have family property, when you have commercial transactions, there cannot be a great variety in how you deal with the dispute resolution. When you have evidence, it has to be led in a particular manner. What is judicially correct? So if you look at what we were surprised when you look at the detailed procedures laid out in the Vyavahara Adhyaya of Yajnavalkya Smriti, it is almost like an 18 to 20 mapping. So 18 aspects of the Yajnavalkya Smriti can be mapped onto most of what we have in our present law. So there is a great deal of similarity with the present law, which is inescapable because human beings eventually have only limited ways to transact with each other. But there is also some interesting deviation, and that deviation is where we can learn from. For example, we have a great problem of perjury in our courts today. Whereas in the Yajnavalkya Smriti, it says if you have a complaint, before you can file the complaint, you have to actually submit a deposit with the court, which can be forfeitable if you are proved wrong. It is called a pratibhu. And only after you can make the deposit can you even start arguing on the matter. And that pratibhu itself is a great deterrent to bringing false disputes or rather irrelevant or sort of meaningless disputes. So only if you feel your dispute has sufficient value, you put the pratibhu before the court, argue the matter, and if you are unable to prove your matter, even you have a sort of stake in the matter. That means you can lose your pratibhu or deposit. So that sort of, there are certain variations in the methodology which make something that we should be looking to even for learning from our present problems. So the evidences in Dharmaśāstram, for example, and they are recognizable in the modern context. Pramanam are the means of proving truth. Human means are Manusham. There are also divine means called Divyam. Amongst the human means, and Manusham is the primary source for evidence that in all disputes that is mentioned in the Vyavahara Adhyaya. You have likhitam, documented evidence. You have bhukti, enjoyment, possession, which is still used today. And you have sakshi, oral testimony. So these are the various types of evidences. Even likhitam is further divided into shasanam, chirakam, etc. So therefore, there was a great similarity, similar kind of processes. And so therefore, it's not that we have, if you have to adopt some aspects of the Dharmaśāstram today, it doesn't mean that we have to reinvent the wheel or start a new process as such. There are many aspects that can be sort of understood and brought into our system to strengthen our own systems. It's possible. So some of the aspects, so just to give you a flavor of the Dharmaśāstram traditions, this is Shloka 114. I'm sure you also want to run through this. Vibhagam chet pita kuryad ichchaya vibhajet sutan jyeshtham va shrestha bhagena sarve vasyus samam shirah. So there, this had a detailed description in the Mitakshara. And one aspect that we have to see is that whether the Yajnavalkya Smriti says that the elder son can get a greater share of the wealth when it is sort of divided by the father. Whereas Mitakshara Kara, Vijnaneshwara says that at the time of Mitakshara, Yajnavalkya might have been 2100 years ago. Mitakshara was 900 years ago. There was a passage of around 1200 years in between. By the time Mitakshara Kara's time had come, he said it is no longer right. It doesn't make sense for giving higher value to the elder brother. It has to be equally divided. So he says the understanding that the elder brother should get a higher share is no longer relevant in current society. This is said 900 years ago. And he had the ability to say that what the intended understanding of the Yajnavalkya Smriti is that all brothers should have equal division. So this essentially, and he brought out the aspect of there being a reinvention of the Mitakshara, or reinvention of the Smriti traditions, generation to generation. It cannot be taken as cast in stone. It is not something that we should take as something that cannot be changed, invaluable. It has to pass the test of social consciousness. That is, it should be conscionable. It should be something that the society should be able to accept at that point of time, given our present circumstances. And that changes. Every generation should have what we think as right today might not continue to be right 3-4 generations down the line. So that freedom is given to the generation to work out what is judicious after keeping the base of the Smriti tradition in perspective. So keep the base of the Smriti tradition, see how much, whether that has to have a certain amount of alteration or change in understanding to make it more suitable to the present society. So that level of freedom for a society to reinvent itself. So this is one when we talk about being swatantra, when we talk about being free or independent, that freedom comes from our ability to be masters of our destiny. And that freedom is provided for by the Smriti Parampara. And throughout the Daya Vibhaga, there are specific financial provisions for women. Interestingly, these provisions do not find a reflection in our current society, current Bharatiya society. For example, there is this concept of a Stridhanam. And I'm sure most of you in your families don't have that concept of Stridhanam anymore, right? You probably don't have it now. Whereas Stridhanam was something that was inviolable. There was a concept of a woman having a right to a certain fairly large sum. If you look at, for example, if you read the sister text of the Dharma, Arthaśāstram, Arthashastra says that up to around 2000 karshanapas. Karshapana is a means of monetizing wealth. That is roughly around 3 grams of gold. One karshapana is around 3 grams of gold. 2000 karshapanas will be around 6 kgs of gold. So a woman has a right just for her security to up to 2000 karshapanas of wealth from the family property. And how she gets that money is because she is being useful to the family. She is sort of worked for the family's existence, and the woman is considered to be the core of society. So you have the woman followed by the family, the Dampati, and the Dampati is the creative core of society, because any creation of new human beings has to come from the Dampati. Any creation of wealth has to come from the Dampati, the married pair. And even in the married pair, it is the woman who forms the bedrock of the Grihini Gruhamuchyate. That is a kind of approach. So for that bedrock to be stable, to be able to be productively providing for a sort of meaningful society, that bedrock has to have financial stability. And that comes through this Stridhanam. And Stridhanam, as we mentioned, up to around So a reasonable amount of wealth that a woman can possess for her individual sense of security can work out up to 2,000 karshapanas, which I mentioned was 6 kgs of gold. You can have whatever value it has in a particular time. So that's the kind of wealth that other family members cannot object to, saying that how come this woman has got so much of the family wealth concentrated with her? It is reasonable for her to have that much wealth because she is going to be the bedrock of society. So the women had a sense of financial independence. They had an ability to think of their own destiny, their children's destiny, and the destiny of the family. So it was not something. So there have been, so therefore these aspects like Stridhanam, which have been repeatedly discussed, not only the Dharmaśāstram but Arthaśāstram, we find that today they have we have deviated from some of those traditions themselves. And these help us to reimagine what it could be to be an effective, productive society with this kind of a perspective. And rights to women. So there is a detailed discussion. In fact, Shloka 124 is worth reading for anybody, any member of the society. There is a pro and con. So there are the opposite sides that talk about whether women deserve wealth at all. There are certain viewpoints, conservative viewpoints, which say that women don't need wealth because they are supported by the other members of the family. Whereas Mitaksharakara, which is Vijnaneshwara, he puts it in no uncertain terms that woman, just as a man, has a right to as much wealth for all her purusharthas, because she also has a right to her purusharthas. She needs her dharma. She has to be able to do her dhanam as she pleases. She has to have her artha and her kama. So therefore, woman has equivalent right to wealth. And then as we go ahead, we see that in various shlokas, it is the wife who has an equal share to the wealth as the sons. So after the father's passing away, it is the mother of the children, or the wife who is surviving the husband. She has rights to the equal wealth as a son would get. And that is, of course, that's some of those aspects are reflected even in the Hindu Succession Act, because when a wife becomes a first-class heir and having equal right to wealth, etc., that is reflected here. The point being is that our traditions had this specific perspective which empowered those who needed empowerment. And that empowerment reflected in quality of life, day-to-day living, and in the structure of our family. And that is primarily one of the greatest achievements of our country, if you ask me, the fact of our family values remaining. And the family values remained because these family traditions have survived. The family dharmas have actually survived, because each family has its own individual dharma. Even today, when we do various ritualistic actions, yagam, etc., they'll say, follow your family traditions, because each family itself is like a corporate entity. So it continues. Each stakeholder, the stakeholders of a family are the new members of the family who are born into it, who marry into the family, etc. And that family as a sort of a long-standing corporate entity continues. That's why we have this concept of in our country, which is not there in other countries. No other country has this concept of a Hindu undivided family. The concept of a Hindu undivided family itself is a recognition of the fact that the Dharmaśāstram was essentially ensuring that the families are empowered, and empowered both in the Artha sense and the Dharma sense, and those form the bedrock of our society. And the women in the family are the bedrock of the family. And the other vision that we have seen earlier also, there is also a succor for illegitimate children. So that today, every child needs an identity. Otherwise, it sort of gets left out of society. And you have a great deal of discussion in shlokas 128 to 132 in the Yajnavalkya Smriti, in the Vyavahara Adhyaya, where there is great effort to ensure that no child is left without an identity. In some way, it could be a Kanina, it could be a Putrika in different ways, etc. Somehow the child which is born, if a child is born to a woman, there should be an effort to give it some level of identity so that it can form part of a productive society. It is not left out of the social fabric, so to say. Otherwise, over few generations, if you have such outliers in society, it will lead to the society itself becoming unrecognizable after some time. So the effort is to try to make sure everybody can come back to society, be part of society. So if an unwed woman, has a child, the effort is to give it the identity of the maternal grandfather. So he gets to perform the shraddha, etc., inherit wealth from the maternal grandfather, rather than it becoming an sort of an outcast in society. So therefore, over a period of time, you have less outliers in society and more strengthened sort of a social structure in a way. So therefore, to the effort of the Shastram is also to look at these disengaged entities who would otherwise have become vulnerable. And that happens not only in our society, in other societies also. It is these kind of children who eventually start, when you look at crime and other aspects where social structure starts to break down, it is the empowerment or the perspective that takes care of these that have to be looked into. The rights of widows and daughters also are there. Patni duhitaraschaiva pitaro bhrataras-tatha tatsuta gotraja bandhush shishya sabbrahmacharinaha. So all of these single widowed women also can inherit the entire wealth if no sons exist. So that there is a discussion whether such a widow has right to wealth. What will she do? Next, who will get it? But then the Shastra, at least the Mitakshara viewpoint, is that look, she also has the right to live her life. That we'll take care of later. But at this point, she has the right to inherit the wealth. That comes out. And she has the right to her purusharthas and dharma by donations, etc. And one question was only whether wealth is only for yajna. And for a yajna, you need a married couple. So what will a single woman do? And she cannot perform yajna. So the discussion there was yajna is not the only way you can do dharma. You can do dhanam, you can do various other aspects of dharma. So therefore, even if she has to do dharma with her money, she has to have access to the wealth and free access to use the wealth as the way she wants to. So these are all the discussions that are there in the Dharmaśāstram. And there is a detailed discussion on Rana-dhanam, different types of debts. Just to give you an example, we can't cover the whole of Dharmaśāstram in a short discussion. Timer 10 minutes? 10 minutes. Okay, I'll try to wrap up. So we have to go into, those who are interested are welcome to read. If you don't have access to Sanskrit, English versions of these various discussions. But I can guarantee you that there is no better way to access the texts and get a sense of what the texts mean than by reading it in Sanskritam. So if you can't read it yourself, find somebody. I'm sure this university has that facility because you have a Sanskrit department and other students, etc. Get to know it on a first-hand basis, and that will give you a sense of understanding and fulfillment that you would otherwise not get. You can skip all of this. These are other smritikaras, Katyayana, Brihaspati, Narada. These are so different smritikaras had different views. Some of them were more progressive, some of them were more conservative, etc. at different points of time. So now quickly we'll go through the Arthaśāstram traditions. So Artha means primarily Manushyavati Bhumi is Artha. That land where human populations can stay, interact, and sort of have social activities between themselves, that only leads to wealth creation. So some uninhabited island or some desert land or some icy sort of land somewhere else does not have any value of Artha because that's just neglected. It is where humans congregate, actively participate, trade, etc. That is where value is added. What is coming out of the earth becomes valuable because humans start dealing with it. That is why Artha deals with where humans exist, where Manushyavati Bhumi. And Arthaśāstram deals with the how to obtain Artha in a larger scale. I'll quickly go through some aspects of Arthaśāstram. Swipe, not going. Left to right. Okay. Okay, yeah, I skipped some. But just to give you a quick out, what we missed is that Arthaśāstram had actually, unlike Dharmaśāstram, which was followed in villages and homes and various aspects of where justice had to be done, and justice had to be first done in the family. So therefore, Dharmaśāstram traditions existed even when we did not have political patronage. So when the colonials came, etc., Dharmaśāstram was still there in the villages, homes, and cities, etc., where aspects of dharma had to be taken care of. Whereas Arthashastra was entirely dependent on political patronage. It talks about how a society has to be governed from the economic perspective. Unfortunately, those traditions had died out. In fact, people had lost track of the Arthashastram texts for 1,000 years. It was only recently in 1900 where it was rediscovered by Shama Shastri. He is a scholar from Mysore. It was rediscovered somewhere in the Tamil Nadu, Kerala area. So some traditions had continued in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, where they found some old commentaries on the Arthashastram. So those had been rediscovered. So now what we are learning about the Arthashastram from the original Sanskrit is something that had been rediscovered 100 years ago, lost it to tradition for around 1,000 years. So it's sort of It's a greater amount of learning that we are doing here. And we get an understanding of how society was being organized. So we had this concept of a Janapada. And a Janapada is something that it's an organization of society, roughly around 800 villages. So when we worked out the math, it looks like around 30 to 40 lakh population is in a Janapada, what we could see in our present districts, for example. And so you have various levels of, so you have a Sthaniyam, which deals with 800 villages. And a Sthaniyam is where the court exists. It's where the main market exists. It's a commercial and the judicial center of a particular part of the country. Then you have a subdivision at the Dronamukham level, Karvatikam level. And so therefore, and at every stage, the focus is on the tax-paying individuals. So it is people who can produce wealth who are given focus. And if you have land and you are unable to make productive use of the land, you can be dispossessed, because essentially it is who is being able to give wealth to the nation has to be recognized. And those who are able to get wealth out of land, either by production or by various other commercial activities, they are given special resources by way of easy loan access, etc. So even today we talk about giving loans to people, but loans have to be prioritized to those people who are more productive. Because even if you need to have a welfare state, if you need to take care of the weakest members, you need to have a productive state. If you have a poor state, you cannot do welfare. So essentially welfare is preceded by wealth creation. And so therefore first look at ways by which wealth can be created, and then look at redistribution, where you can look at the weaker members, etc., to be taken care of. So wealth creation, so we have these two concepts of yoga and kshema. Yoga is creation of wealth, accumulation of wealth, and then kshema is to protect the wealth, and then finally viniyoga, you distribute it in the way that it has to. So there is a great deal of discussion on yoga as a part of. Kshema is the judicial part. So once you earn wealth, it should not be stolen. You should not be swindled. It should not be taken away by unscrupulous people. That is where kshema comes. Judicial administration comes when you need kshema. But yoga means you need the accumulation of wealth, and that is by this structured format. And interestingly, kindly note that agriculture and cattle, today we talk about agriculture being tax-free, whereas Chanakya was very clear that agriculture has to be taxed. Because if you don't tax any entity, you will not be investing in it. So for today, if my GDP is not counting agriculture as a sort of a wealth creation center, I will not be investing in it. Whereas if agriculture is actually creating wealth for the country in terms of taxable income, there will be more irrigation, there will be more effort to sort of improve productivity. So if you look at, the logic of Chanakya comes out in the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Today, if you look at agriculture, we have one of the lowest productivities in the world per acre. If you look at our grains or etc. productivity, we have the lowest productivity because there is hardly any effort going into improving the productivity, because it's not being taxed. It is not a valuable commodity. Whereas Chanakya was very clear, not only agriculture, even cattle has to be taxed. Because only if you tax the cattle, will there be focus on the well-being of the cattle also. So therefore, there is a correlation between taxability and quality of a particular sector. And interestingly, as I mentioned to you, it is not that everybody was considered to be a saint. There are 40 types of corruption. And the word for corruption in Chanakya's Arthaśāstram is lancha, which in Tamil at least we use the word even today, lanjam. We use the word lanjam. So the word is lancha. That's the source. The apabhramsha might be lanja. So tesham haranopayash chatvarimshat. He has talked about 40 types by which a government officer can swindle public money. And he has talked about purvam siddham paschad avataritam. So wealth that is created today, you put it in the accounts after 3 months. So for 3 months, the officer can enjoy the wealth as his personal reason. Then paschat siddham purvam avataritam. What is going to be created tomorrow, you already account for it today, and you get some kickback as a result of that. So therefore, these are only some examples that are mentioned here. He has talked about 40 types of misappropriation of wealth that is possible in public service. And this is an interesting shloka. It says, Yatha hyanasvadayitum na shakyam jikhva talastham madhuva vishamba Arthaśāstram hyarthacharena rajñah svalpopyanasva dayitum na shakya. So it says, just as when you put honey on your tongue, Can you avoid tasting it? You can't. I mean, you will have to taste the honey when it is in your tongue. Similarly, a government officer or any public servant, when he is dealing with public wealth, he cannot but escape the ability to sort of feel the value of the money. So therefore, you have to keep that normal human tendency in mind when you define systems. And even then, when he goes on to say who, and so therefore there's a long period of probation for officers. Today, when we say 1 year, you are inducted in government service and you can be regularized and you become a permanent government servant for life. In fact, in Chanakya's time, it was the opposite. You will be inducted into the government and you will probably be made permanent at the fag end of your career when you have passed all the tests. And so that this one of the primary attributes of a person who should be made permanent is na bhakshayanti ye tvarthan nyayato vardhayanti cha nityadhikarah karyaste rajñah priyahiteratha. So merely being uncorrupt is not sufficient for being made a permanent officer. You should also be growth oriented. So there are many people who are uncorrupt, but they do not create wealth for society. So you only people with both these attributes, that is na bhakshayanti, they should not be corrupt, and vardhayanti, they should also be growth oriented. Such people should become nityadhikara. They should only be made permanent in government service. So that is a different approach to dealing with public money and public administration. So some of the insights of the Arthaśāstram is that there is a great emphasis on welfare state, no doubt. State has to be welfare, but welfare needs wealth generation. So first you create the wealth, then you talk about helping people with the wealth. Efficient public administration is the key. Integrity is important. There are great details, as I said, 40 types of corruption, etc. How each of those corruption types can be measured, measurability of this lancha, etc. Integrity in public administration is crucial. Enterprise and merit are incentivized in society. State is incentivized by the right to collect taxes. So why should I, as a ruler, why should I be bothered about the well-being of the people? Because if I ensure that the markets are functional, if I ensure there is law and order, if I ensure that there are sort of pathways for trade, etc., I can collect taxes, my wealth increases. So therefore, there is a mutual correlation between taxability and the quality of services provided in society. So just to see that this is the kind of mantra that is there. Welfare comes from wealth. Wealth comes from enterprise. Enterprise comes from a favorable environment. A favorable environment leads to taxation and revenue generation for the state. So this is a virtuous cycle sort of that is projected for a state sort of to grow up and improve its quality. And as I said, I'll close with these few, one or two slides. The third adhikaranam is Dharmaśāstram. It talks about judicial administration in Arthaśāstram. And it talks about, the first adhyaya talks about processes. So there is a great similarity between the third adhikaranam of the Arthaśāstram and the second adhikaranam of the Yajnavalkya Smriti. Yajnavalkya Smriti, the similar detail in which it talks about judicial administration, it is dealt with in the Dharmaśāstram adhikaranam of the Arthaśāstram. In fact, these three texts are supposed to be very similar in terms of their treatment of judicial administration. One is Agni Puranam, Arthaśāstram, and Yajnavalkya Smriti. So they are considered to be sister texts with regard to judicial administration. And even here, you can go to the next slide. The first chapter in the Adhyaya after dealing with procedures is about Vivaha Samyuktam, because Chanakya believes that it is a family which forms the basis of society. Any society can grow only when the family grows, and there have to be family disputes that have to be dealt with first. And even in family disputes, it is the disputes between husband and wife, etc. So if you have people stuck in an unproductive relationship, that will lead overall to an unproductive society. So there are various aspects of what are the limits to which a husband and wife have to be sort of having their maryada. You have the Vivaha Dharma. There is again a detailed discussion on Stridhana Kalpa, on how a woman has a right to her own wealth, and that forms the basis for a successful society, etc. Stridhanam is also given. How Stridhanam has to be accumulated by women, etc. is all detailed. Interestingly, I'll just close with that. There are various types of maryadas in the Vivaha Samyuktam itself. There are various maryadas. And interestingly, to what extent can the husband sort of exert his rights over the wife? Similarly, what extent the wife can have rights over the husband in terms of how much you can take the other partner for granted. And if it goes beyond a limit, both the husband and wife are subject to penalty. That is, if you mistreat in terms of you use harsh words, or even physically if you mistreat. And there, to that extent, at least the Arthaśāstram is gender neutral. It says husband can also mistreat the husband, wife can mistreat the husband, she will also be subject to punishment. Husband can also mistreat the wife. So therefore, and there are various maryadas in, for example, the extent to which you have to recognize the quality of a marital relationship. And if you stray beyond that, the penalties that are applicable on the woman for straying are half the penalties that are applicable upon the man. So for example, if there is even a tendency to look, if there is an adulterousness coming into the relationship, if the wife is penalizable with say 50 panas, for the same event, if it is done by the husband, he is penalizable with 100 panas. So therefore, both aspect, and there is for certain aspects there is a greater responsibility placed on the woman, and for certain aspects greater responsibility is placed upon the man, depending on the nature of the transgression. So therefore he deals with vivaha samyuktam in great detail, with great emphasis on the stridhanam aspect of the woman's right to economic independence, before going into the other aspects of this one, dispute resolution. So this, just to give you an overview of what we can expect if you get into more detailed reading of Dharmaśāstram and Arthaśāstram, especially from the perspective of judicial and social public administration. So thank you. It won't be really engaging if you don't express your queries, doubts.
You have mentioned about the agriculture tax, right? So if we put more tax on the agriculture, it will lead to the more investment. So the sector will be improving tremendously. So there is also a possibility that there will be the exploitation, right? So tax should be paid by the farmer or the landlords who are possessing the land.
No, here very clear that the taxability is on the person who is benefiting from the land. So the farmer, etc., the workers, they will be paid wages. So they are paid wages as per the labor that they contribute to the land, etc. The landlord who has earned, he has to pay the taxes. But even there are multiple caveats. For example, if there is a famine or there is no rain, etc., these are periods where the state has to express its welfare. So whatever is stored, etc., is handed over to the people. So it is very clear. There's this, I think, 26th adhyaya of the Arthaśāstram, where it talks about if the king taxes abnormally at a greater rate than what the public can, he's actually eating off the people. He's consuming the people. It's equivalent to him sort of eating the people in a way. So naram bhakshayati. And that is absolutely prohibited. So there has to be a balance in the taxation, and where there are events which require taxation to be waived, those have to also be considered, especially in terms of agricultural taxation. But the idea is that if you don't tax a particular sector, you are not investing in a sector, and if you don't invest in a sector, productivity falls over time.
Oh, actually, what I was thinking, that if you don't tax a sector, the people will come to know that this sector is more profitable because we don't have to pay tax now, so we can eliminate the sector. So we can.
But then, if to grow crop, you need to have water. You need to have various other aspects. And if the Raja probably knows that he is able to collect whatever tax, reasonable tax from that particular sector, he is able to divert his resources to build canals or whatnot, sort of invest, so that the productivity increases.
So the investment will be from the government.
Government, naturally. Usually, especially irrigation. Irrigation is a major issue, and irrigation, and also law and order, because it is in these agricultural lands that the maximum disputes occur. If somebody is diverting your water, that becomes a source of dispute. If somebody sort of occupies your land to a certain extent, somebody has his cows graze on your field. I mean, these all become serious disputes at the rural level. And you require effective law and order. You need to put resources there to ensure that people are assured that their labor will have sort of meaningful outcome. And to that extent, you require more resources. That is the logic applied by Chanakya to indicate why these sectors. Today, when we talk about non-taxable sectors, here there is talk about, justified, reasonable tax, so that it leads to a win-win situation. That's
Okay,
it.
sir. Sir, and also in the Smriti, it will cover both Dharmaśāstram and Arthaśāstram, or the Arthaśāstram will cover the Smritis, or
Oh, that's a good question, because there are some discussions about Dharmaśāstram prevailing over Arthaśāstram in the Smriti discussions. So there is a recognition that there are various aspects of the Smriti which are Arthaśāstram oriented. Some are Dharma oriented. So within the Smriti itself, you can
split between Dharmaśāstram and Arthaśāstram. Okay, sir.
Arthaśāstram of Kautilya is definitely focused towards
Wealth creation. That I understood.
The Arthashastram traditions survived even the non-Vedic period. So when we had the Bauddha period, the Nastika period, all of them were able to recognize or to associate themselves with the Arthashastram traditions, because it goes beyond the aspect of Dharma. It talks about productivity primarily.
Okay.
Therefore, those systems survived even when you did not have the Vedic base there.
Okay, sir. Understood, sir.
Namaste, sir. So you stated the Matsya Nyaya, as in where the powerful eat the weak fishes. So is it still applicable in the modern judiciary? Like, is it present in the modern judiciary system? And if it is, has it crept its way in via this colonialism approach? That is my question.
I think in any right-minded judicial system, including our system, looks to reduce Matsya Nyaya. When the fact that you have reservation, etc., is an effort to reduce Matsya Nyaya to a certain extent. The question is, in any legal system, rule of law means reducing Matsya Nyaya. If you have, rule of jungle means might is right. So definitely, any legal system will seek to reduce Matsya Nyaya, and it is that. So there are common aspects to the end objectives of any rule of law principle. And our rule of law principle also definitely would like to reduce Matsya Nyaya. I think the objectives are same. We want to have good quality life for the maximum number of people. There is no difference in objective. How you achieve it, you might want to sort of fine tune it. That's.
Like they say, this decolonize. So if we are successful at this approach, will this still exist, or will this also be wiped out? This Matsya Nyaya. Like, this exists regardless of whatever the judicial system that is present over generations, or this is like from time to time this exists.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just because you have the Smriti written down on a piece of paper doesn't mean that if it is not, if the spirit is not effectively administered. You say, I'm sure when you have got Kamsa, Jarasandha, or for whatever reason Shri.Krishnan came to this world to remove all those bhubharas. At that time also they had all these smritis, the same Sanskrit, all these things were there. Obviously they were not employing it in the right spirit. That is why we needed to have a Purnavatara to clean up and have the Mahabharata, etc. So therefore, it is how it is applied also that matters, not merely having it in text, but letter and spirit that matters. So reading the Dharmaśāstram gives us a greater understanding of the spirit, and that's why it matters.
Thank you, sir.
मम एकः सन्देहः वर्तते विभागविषये भवद्भिः एकः श्लोकः प्रदर्शितः तत्र एकः अंशः आसीत् ज्येष्ठं वा श्रेष्ठभागेन इति तत्र काचित् युक्तिः अस्ति वा ज्येष्ठस्य कृते श्रेष्ठभागः दातव्यः तत्र काचित् युक्तिः अस्ति
एवं युक्तयः तु बह्व्यः सन्ति नाम ज्येष्ठानां कृते श्रेष्ठभागः दातव्यः सः श्रेष्ठभागः अपि कियान् भवेत् नाम द्विगुणं भवेत् वा केवलं तत्र प्रायः तत्रापि मर्यादा वर्तते यदि ज्येष्ठाय किञ्चित् श्रेष्ठत्वं दातव्यं चेदपि तत् केवलं 1/13 एक 13वां भाग तावदेव भवेत् बहु अधिकं न दातव्यम् इति पूर्वं नियमः आसन् एव परन्तु मिताक्षराकारेण तस्य अभिप्रायः अस्ति यत् ज्येष्ठाय श्रेष्ठभागः नैव दातव्यः, समभागः एव कर्तव्यः, तेनैव परिवारे समरसत्वं भविष्यति, न केवलं तस्मिन् काले आगामि काले अपि, नो चेत् भविष्यति एव अनन्तरं यत् तव पितृचरणाय अधिकं दत्तं तस्मादेव अस्माकम् इयं स्थितिः अस्ति। नाम सर्वदा तत्र काचित् नाम समता भवेत् जनेषु, येन तत्र वृद्धेः अवसराः सर्वेषां कृते समानाः भवेयुः। नो चेत् तद् शङ्कुना एव, नाम तद् दुःखशङ्कुना एव प्रायः तत्र अनप्रोडक्टिविटी आगच्छति इति अस्मात् विषयात् अनेन विज्ञानेश्वरेण उक्तं यत् कदाचित् श्रेष्ठभागत्वमेव न कल्पनीयं, सर्वत्र समभागत्वमेव कल्पनीयम् इति तेन उक्तं।
तर्हि द्वितीयः सर्वे वास्युः
समांशेन तो तेन उक्तम् अस्मिन् युगे अस्मिन् काले। पूर्वं तत्र याज्ञवल्क्यस्मृतौ यदुक्तं, मनुस्मृतौ वा यदुक्तं, तत्काले कदाचित् अधिकभागस्य युक्तिः काचित् आसीत् नाम, परन्तु इदानीं नाम 900 वर्षेभ्यः प्राक् सा युक्तिः न दृश्यते इति।
तत्र भवद्भिः अनन्तरं 40 भ्रष्टाचारः प्रदर्शितः। तत्र हारणोपायः इति एकः
हारणोपायः नाम अधिकारिणा अध्यक्षेण नाम तेन हरणोपायः हरणं कथं कुर्यात् सः नाम सामाजिकधनस्य।
40 उपायाः ते सन्ति वा अथवा भ्रष्टाचारविषयः?
ते नाम यः भ्रष्टः अस्ति तस्य उपायः एवं,
यः भ्रष्टः
तेभ्यः उपायेभ्यः वयं रक्षणीयः एव। कर्तव्य एवं 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 हम हाँ वर्तते वर्तते नाम शास्त्र अनुमितमस्ति। हाँ, नियमानुसारं संशोधनं परिवर्तितं, परन्तु अहं किं वदामि नाम इदानीं मिताक्षरकारः विज्ञानेश्वरः सः आसीत्, तस्य समकालिकः एव अपरार्कः आसीत्, सः कोङ्कणदेशे आसीत्। मिताक्षरकारः तु चालुक्यप्रदेशे नाम इदानीं कलबुर्गी उत्तरकन्नडदेशे आसीत्, गुल्बर्गा। तस्य समकालीनः कश्चित् अपरार्कः आसीत्, सः कोङ्कणदेशस्थः आसीत्। परन्तु तस्य मतभेदः अस्ति। समकाले एव सः उक्तवान् ज्येष्ठाय श्रेष्ठभागः दातव्यः। एवं मतभेदाः वर्तन्ते, यत् अनुरूपं यद् भवतापि उक्तं, यत् ग्रामेषु तत्र एवं कारणानि अपि सन्ति एव। कारणानि सन्ति, व्यवहारः अपि दृश्यते, परन्तु अस्य मतं मिताक्षराकारस्य मतमस्ति यत् कथञ्चित् न देयं, सर्वत्र समता एव स्थापनीया इति।
इदानीं विवाहविषयेपि भवद्भिः प्रतिपादितं, विवाहविच्छेदविषये कश्चित् प्रसङ्गः अस्ति वा तत्र? नाम डिवोर्स् इदानीं बहु क्रियमाणं वर्तते अस्ति, तत्र उचितं वा?
तत्र धर्मशास्त्रे शब्दशः न दृश्यते, अर्थशास्त्रे तु नाम तस्य विचारः दृश्यते एव। तत्र मोक्षः इति उच्यते। नाम यदि इदानीन्तनकाले यथा षड्मासा सेपरेशन् इति उच्यते, षड्मासानां कृते सेपरेशन् भवति चेत् तदनन्तरं डैवर्स् दीयते। तत्र 7 ऋतु कालस्य कृते यदि पत्नी पतिद्वेषवशात्, सः पतिं द्वेष्टि, पतिद्वेषवशात् सा अन्यत्रैव पृथगेव सा निवसति चेत् परिवारकाले जनैः मोक्षः दातुं शक्यते। मोक्षः नाम योगः डैवर्स् रूपेण। डैवर्स् विषये तु बहु अस्ति चिन्तितं, परन्तु डैवर्स् अपि प्रायः सर्वे 8 विवाहाः सन्ति, 8 प्रकाराः विवाहाः सन्ति। तेषु 8 प्रकारेषु केषुचित् एव मोक्षस्य विधानमस्ति अर्थशास्त्रे। केषुचित् ब्राह्मादिविवाहेषु 4 नास्ति। यत्र कन्यादानं क्रियते तत्र नास्ति, परन्तु यत्र अन्यत्र नाम स्वेच्छया गान्धर्वादिविवाहेषु विवाहः क्रियते तत्र मोक्षस्य अवकाशः अस्ति। इदानीं समानरीतिः वर्तते। इदानीं
और एक विनोद वाला एक प्रश्न है।
हाँ,
आपने कहा कि यदि पुरुष मिसबिहेव करे स्त्री के साथ
हाँ,
तो
हाँ,
उसको 100 पॉइंट देना है,
हाँ,
स्त्री मिसबिहेव करे तो उसको 50 पॉइंट देना है।
नहीं, उसमें भी मतभेद है। कुछ
हाँ।
पे जो है स्त्री के ऊपर अधिक उत्तरदायित्व है।
हाँ।
अगर वो जो है व्यभिचार या कोई अतिक्रमण
नहीं,
करे।
मेरा प्रश्न पूरा नहीं, मैं ये पूछना चाह रहा हूँ
हाँ।
कि स्त्री जो 50 पॉइंट देगी वो अपने पति से ही लेके देगी ना?
नहीं,
तो ये तो
स्त्रीधन है।
पति के लिए।
मैंने बोला 6 किलो सोना उसके पास पड़ा हुआ।
अच्छा, अपने स्त्री धन से ही उसको
स्त्रीधन से
दंड
देगी
देना।
और क्या।
ठीक।
Thank you so much, sir, for this insightful session. And all of us would have at least now know the basis of how judicial system was there in the ancient times. We got to know a brief from what sir said. Thank you so much, sir. I now request Dr. R. Naveen to give the vote of thanks.
नमस्तभाभ्यः सभापतिभ्यश्च। गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुस्साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। इदं विशिष्टं व्याख्यानं जगद्गुरु श्री जयेन्द्र सरस्वती श्रीचरणानां पीठारोहण जयन्ती निमित्तम् इदं व्याख्यानम् अत्र सम्पादितं। तत्र जगन्नाथ ट्रस्ट एंडोमेंट लेक्चर इति तैः किञ्चित् निधिः प्रकल्पितः, तदाधारीकृत्य इदं व्याख्यानम् अत्र सम्पादितम्। अतः आदौ श्रीचरणानाम् उभयेषां तत्र आदौ प्रणामाः समर्प्यन्ते। अनन्तरम् अस्माकं कुलपतिवर्याः आचार्याः श्रीनिवासवर्याः एतत् व्याख्यानम् अत्र उत्तमं भवेत्, विशिष्य यदा आधुनिक समाजे उपकारः स्यात् तथाविध शीर्षकम् अवलम्ब्य कर्तव्यमिति आचार्यैः यदा आदेशः कृतः तदा अस्माभिः विभागाध्यक्षेण समम् उपविश्य आलोचनं कृतम्। एते भवन्ति चेत् समीचीनं भविष्यति इति अस्माभिः चिन्तितं। तत्र समयोपि नासीत्। 21 दिनाङ्के एव अयं विषयः निर्णीतः। झटिति एतेषां कृते यदा दूरवाणी कृता तदा अनुपदं कृष्णन्वर्यैः अङ्गीकृतम् अस्माकम् आह्वानं। झटित्येव एतत् सर्वं संसाध्य छात्राणां कृते यथा सुलभतया व्याख्यानं कर्तुं शक्यते तथा एतैः सज्जीकृत्य आगत्य प्रायः अहं चिन्तयामि 1.5 घण्टा यावत् व्याख्यानं निरन्तरं कृतवन्तः। तथाविधाः तेभ्यः अपि अत्र अस्मिन् सन्दर्भे धन्यवादाः समर्प्यन्ते। एतैः सह समागताः मुकुन्दन्वर्याः तेपि अत्र एतत् विद्याविषये तत्र ज्ञानोपार्जनं सर्वदापि कुर्वन्तः सन्ति। तेपि अस्मिन् सन्दर्भे समागताः। तेषामपि अत्र विशिष्य धन्यवादाः अस्माकं विभागपक्षतः अत्र समर्प्यन्ते। अनन्तरम् एतद्विषये यदा कार्यक्रमः सञ्चालनीयः इति आचार्याणां सकाशे यदा पृष्टं विभागद्वयं तैः झटित्येव एतत् कार्यम् एवं साधनीयम् इति अस्माकं कृते उपदेशं कृतवन्तः। तेषां कृतेपि विशिष्य अस्मिन् सन्दर्भे धन्यवादाः समर्प्यन्ते। अस्माकं सहाध्यापकाः समे तत्र समागताः तेषां विशिष्य अस्मिन् सन्दर्भे धन्यवादाः समर्प्यन्ते। यैः विना अयं कार्यक्रमः न भवति। ते सर्वेपि अत्र बहवः यथा पूर्वमेव नरसिंहन्वर्यैः अत्र भवतां कृते सूचना दत्ता केनापि बहिः न गन्तव्यम्, अत्र उपविश्य वस्तुतः तथैव भवद्भिः सर्वैरपि पालितम्। अतः छात्राणां कृते विशिष्य अस्मिन् सन्दर्भे धन्यवादाः। अत्र PhD छात्राः अनन्तरम् अस्माकं मैनेज्मेण्ट् पक्षतः समागताः आचार्याः वेङ्कटेशवर्याः तेषामपि अस्मिन् सन्दर्भे विशिष्य धन्यवादाः समर्प्यन्ते। मया कदाचित् केषाञ्चित् नामानि त्यक्तानि स्युः तत् मां तत्र क्षमस्व इति सम्प्राप्य तेषामपि अत्र धन्यवादान् अत्र उक्त्वा एतावता अहं विरमामि। नमस्काराः।